Now, very happy to say we have a special guest on the show this evening. He will be a name familiar to many of you, I'm sure, especially if you're of a certain vintage when it comes to Formula One. Runner-up in the '01 season, 13 Grand Prix wins, 62 podiums, 15 years in the sport, in F1 that is. Many more years in the sport with Williams and McLaren between 96 and '04, and then laterally a Red Bull as well, and he is a Red Bull athlete. I am, of course, talking about David Coulthard. David, you're very welcome. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Yourself?
Very well under the circumstances. Where are you isolating and bedding down for the time being?
Well, in my adopted home of Monte Carlo. So I'm here with my wife, my stepdaughter, who's currently put her studies on hold. She's 22, and our 11-year-old son, who is very happy to be homeschooling and Zoom schooling because he gets more game time in between. So it's quite interesting to see how it's more challenging maybe for adults than it is for kids.
Every cloud.
Indeed.
So we see you on our TV screens very much as a pundit these days. Aside from that, how are you spending the bulk of your time? Not that that's not plenty already.
Well, this challenge that we're all facing now of limited travel, and certainly this is a fairly unique scenario for me after more than 25 years of my life traveling the world to have spent a month in one place. I think that's got to be a first, actually, since I moved to Monaco in '95. But what I've been doing is using the time as best I can to not only be more part of a normal family routine, because clearly if you're traveling the world a lot, then your normal 9 to 5 is not part of the schedule. So, prioritizing family, trying to, of course, take care of business, which is somewhat stalling at the moment, but same for everybody. And also physically investing in a bit more training than I would normally do. I've just turned 49. Haven't really done a lot of I'd say structured training since I've retired from Formula One. I've kept, active on bicycle and swimming and things like that. But certainly if you saw me in the gym, it would be because I was nicking an apple or some water or something. But I've started to engage in a bit more exercise. So trying to use the time positively.
I have a bunch of questions here and our time is short. So I'll jump in no particular order. With driving, as you matured and I presume had family or maybe children or more commitments, does having more to lose in any respect dampen your risk taking, or is it really just reaction time slow and that's the reason drivers slow down?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I think it's as you get older, you inevitably, sands of time, you may well have a database of knowledge and experience, but physically you're starting to decline. And it is the reality of life that depending on your genetics, depending, I guess, on how you look after yourself, you'll be various points where people start to drop off in performance. But I think that we naturally develop over our racing careers an ability to not think about anything else when you're in the car. And if in the case of children, if you look at Michael Schumacher, he had 2 children whilst he was winning many races and world championships. So it's confirmation that sports people are selfish when they're in the moment. They don't think about anything else other than their performance.
And did you ever battle with your nerve across your career?
Not really, I have to say. Again, because I raced since I was 11 years old, you understand that nerves can be used positively. You get nerves for different reasons. You get nerves because of uncertainty as to whether you made a good decision on setup, or nerves because the conditions are challenging, wet races and things like that. But you have to focus and harness that and put it into to delivering. So I never felt that they ever got the better of me. And I honestly don't think that anyone would do, whether it's skydiving or down, mountain biking or motor racing, if you really, truly were scared of the consequence. Because if you were, you would never be able to focus.
It was a fantastic interview. I can't quite remember where you did it, but you told an amazing story. I think it was shortly after Senna's death, around that time perhaps, and you had been in an accident yourself and knocked unconscious. And you made a really interesting, I don't know how welcome it was, but a really interesting phone call to your mother after you had experienced being knocked out.
Well, actually, yes. For me, it was a bit of a revelation because until that point in testing 95, so it was after Ayrton had passed. I was in my first full season with Williams, and we had an issue at Silverstone in a test, and I crashed at Club Corner. And as was the sort of spec of the sport at that time, there wasn't really any tires in front of the wooden sleepers, and we didn't have the head and neck support system that they have today. So my head hit the side of the car, my helmet was cracked, and I was knocked out. So you come round, and it's the first time I'd been knocked out, and you're trying to sort of get your mind around where you are and you're okay. And my first thought was to look at my watch, because I was convinced that the medical officer on duty on that day would not allow me to drive again if I didn't know what time it was.
Hmm.
So I looked at my watch and it was 10:15, and I was thinking, wow, I'm sure I'd done a lot more testing. But it was actually the first run of the day, because at that time you started testing at Silverstone at 10 o'clock because of local noise issues. And anyway, the doctor, as it happened, only asked me if I was okay, to which I said yes. And he never asked me the time. But later that day, they got the car rebuilt and I went back out. But that evening, reflecting on the crash, it seemed to me that being knocked out could be like, sadly, what Ayrton experienced, or Roland Ratzenberger in '94, where they, never came back to consciousness after their accident. So the point leading up to being knocked out, I was feeling that I was doing my job. I was trying to control the car. I knew something wasn't quite right, but I wasn't full of fear, and I certainly wasn't sort of screaming as I went towards the barrier. So I wanted to share that with my mother, because clearly, in the case of Ayrton and Roland Ratzenberger and any televised sport where there could be a fatality, then people are watching, somebody go towards their death. And I wanted my mother to know that if that ever happened to me in a Grand Prix, to be assured that I'm not full of fear at that moment. I'm full of doing what I love doing, which is driving. And I thought that would give her some comfort. But I got halfway through the conversation and she's like, "Oh, son, I don't want to listen to this." So I never quite got to finish the story. But anyway, it was a revelation for me. And I'll carry that thought to the grave whenever that point comes.
Yes, it was a fascinating one. And on Senna, because I know a few modifications notwithstanding, effectively you drove that same car subsequent to his passing. I dare say you get asked about someone like Senna all the time. He fascinates me, and I'm a bit too young to fully remember him driving in real time, but the documentary captured him wonderfully, it seemed. And he is this, in the documentary, and this is the question I'm going to build up to. But in the documentary, he is a bit special. He is this heady mix of depth to his thinking and an ability to communicate at a certain level as well, anger and vulnerabilities. In real life, away from the drama of a documentary, was he a bit special to be around, or is that documentary in some respects almost inflated the kind of caliber of person that I suspect he was?
Well, I think that what documentaries do, or any books or films that celebrate somebody's life, they take a common belief and they enhance it, don't they? Because that's what people want. It's a little bit, we expect James Bond to get the bad guy, kiss the girl, and save Britain. There's a formula to these things which we enjoy. But I think that. And in actual fact, I've never seen the Senna documentary for the simple reason that I was there, active at that period as a test driver prior to Ayrton, with Alain Prost, who was his great adversary, and then obviously testing for Ayrton when sadly he was killed. So I have my own memories of that event, which I just simply don't feel that I want a snapshot in time in a documentary to I don't want to be the guy that goes, well, that's not how I remember it.
Yes.
I remember it how I remember it, and therefore the documentary will be. It's been widely received as being very good, and I'm happy for that, because I think that Ayrton was an incredible individual. And one little story then that maybe would serve to highlight that he did have an incredible presence was at the official launch of him being the driver for the '94 season was done in Portugal. We were testing in Estoril. We did the shakedown with the car, Damon Hill obviously was his teammate. I was there as a test driver, did all the filming that was necessary, and we had a press event in Lisbon. And I was in the room with all the various journalists, and Ayrton arrived into this busy room. And slowly but surely, the room fell silent as this sort of wave of recognition that the first people saw he was in the room, and then the next people sort of, you can imagine all these guys elbowing each other, going, "Oh, there's Ayrton, there's Ayrton." And eventually the whole room was silent. Such was his, the expectation that he was coming. This wasn't him getting on stage, having been announced. This was him just entering the room. So I think it absolutely sums up. He had star quality. He had presence. He was, as you pointed, a man that would think deeply about what he was about to say. And it was one of the cherished memories of my racing career that I was able to work with him for a short time as a test driver and look at how he drove, looking at the data and understand where my strengths were, where my weaknesses were. And he is a large part, not just, of course, sadly because he lost his life, but he's a large part of why I was given the opportunity at Williams, because he told Frank Williams, or Sir Frank Williams, that he'd been impressed with the work I'd done in testing, and he really felt that I deserved an opportunity as a driver in Formula One. Clearly, he didn't say that expecting that his time would come too early. But it was something that Frank took on board and was part of his decision making when they gave me the drive.
David, how would you describe your driving style? What marked you out? What made you of a Formula One caliber and someone who could finish second in the World Championship one year and have 13 Grand Prix wins? When you were on your day at your best, what were you doing well?
I think that I was quite efficient. I don't think that I was a flamboyant driver, and certainly by being quite smooth, what that meant was when the car was talking to me, I think that I could take the challenge to Mika and to Michael and the other drivers of that period. The downside of my driving style was that I needed and desired everything to be sort of responding in a way that I expected. And the minute the car was slightly out of balance, I think I struggled to accept that in a way that maybe a Mika or a Michael would just get on and drive. And as much as I tried to adapt over the duration of my career, recognizing some of the deficiencies I had, what I realized in the fullness of time, and certainly absolutely in retirement, is we are the way we are. You can work hard to make yourself fitter, you can work hard to educate yourself and to be the best version of yourself. But just because you really want something doesn't mean that you can make it happen. I'm sure there's a number of great footballers would like to be Ronaldo or Messi, but there's something that separates those two guys from the other very talented footballers. And it's not just their work ethic, it's just a God-given, or whatever your belief is, part of their makeup. So I think that as long as we all feel we're getting the maximum out of ourselves and leaving no stone unturned, you can come to the end of whatever task you're doing or come to an end of a career and rest easy, because no one can ever expect, including yourself, more than your very best. And if you give your very best, then that was you. That was the limit of your talent.
In advance of chatting to you, I had to listen to your interview on the Beyond the Grid podcast, and it confirmed something. I don't know why, but I just suspected you were this type of person for some reason. Diligent, organized, a planner. I suspect when you open your wardrobe, the white shirts are together with the white shirts, the blue shirts with the blue shirts. And you were that type of diligent personality. When it came to race day, you planned things out. You were that type.
Yes. And, I find myself today with our son, telling him the same sort of things that work for me. And he's karting. He's obviously not racing at the moment because of the current situation, but he wanted to go racing. So we've given him that opportunity. And I say to him, because of course, for kids who are all the same, you might not always listen to your parents. But what I do is my sort of trump card is I'll say to our son's called Dayton, and I'll say to Dayton, look, son, I know you're not going to listen to everything I tell you in life, because there'll be a certain element of finding your own way. But until such time as you get to a level in racing, then you've got, one of a number of people, but certainly someone that's been able to race at the highest level and can give you pointers and guides that will enable you to get the best out of every given situation, and being prepared, being organized, being, having your equipment set out in a way that everything comes to hand. I say the more you prepare, then the less you have to think, and it gives you more capacity to then think about reacting to driving. So I'm always trying to get him to be as organized as possible, and I can see elements of that rubbing off on him. And I'm not trying to make a little mini me, of course not. He'll be his own person. He'll make his own journey. But certainly in terms of racing, I believe in a certain formula, which is preparation. And if you take things to chance, then you're probably going to be living on your wits. But if you prepare as best you can, then you've got more capacity to be reactive.
To be reactive, that's interesting. So in effect, you alleviate all the stresses, all the energy drainers, all the we've left too late to get to the racetrack on time. I haven't had my breakfast. You get rid of all that stuff, and that clears the mind so that you can be reactive.
Yeah, 100%. I'd always rather get to the track earlier and leave the track earlier, because for me, being ready for the task ahead of the day, I didn't want to have any distractions. I didn't want to feel anything was beyond my control, because when pressure for me is when you feel you're losing control. If you feel you've done everything you can, that's not pressure, that's just life. But when you feel you're running a bit late, and you feel that you're not able to, other things are influencing getting to the garage or getting in the car that are negatively impacting your time, that's pressure. So why would you want to have that ahead of an important event? And as I mentioned, I would leave the track as soon as my work was done, because I didn't see the point of staying immersed in that pressure point of the paddock once I'd completed all my tasks.
Yeah.
I was, of course, still available to the team, and if I had questions, I could phone in. But I'd then get back to the hotel. Largely speaking, I would be a room service guy, so I didn't have to interact with people, distractions in restaurants and things. Early to bed, wake up early, get in the gym or go for a swim, get ahead of the day. To really, I see some drivers still in the paddock at 10 p.m. at night today when I'm working in television, and I think, what are they really achieving now other than getting to bed late and then affecting their preparation? Sleep is an important part of training. So I was very regimented, and it may not work for everybody, and I accept that, but it certainly worked for me.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We had Eddie Jordan on the show last week, and he talked about bemoaning Eddie Irvine coming home from nightclubs and him banging his head against the wall saying, Eddie, you can't do this. You need to be more diligent. So it shows there's all different types.
Yeah.
I'm sure Eddie Irvine has no regrets either.
Indeed, yeah.
So something, it makes total sense everything you're saying, and not least because once you do get into the arena that you operated in, things were not controllable in so many ways, the speed, the other competitors. And one of the most vivid memories I have of your career, and I can't remember what age I was, and the race escapes me, I'm sure you'll remember, but I remember tuning in one day and seeing an absolutely livid Michael Schumacher walking from his paddock down to your paddock, frankly with a face which suggested he wanted to try and knock your head off, even though I'm not necessarily sure you were in the wrong. I think he went into the back of you from memory, but that was do you remember that moment? That was kind of an amazing example of just how on the edge competitors get in that sphere.
Yeah, I think it was Spa 98. It was a very wet race, so there'd already been a crash, which I think I tried to blame Eddie Irvine for it, but I think I was the actual catalyst for taking out half the field at the start of the Grand Prix, and there was a restart. And then I got involved in another incident and found myself later in the race being lapped by Michael. And he ran into the back of me whilst trying to do that. And tensions were high because the battling for the World Championship with Mika Hakkinen, my teammate. So Michael came down to the garage to try and accuse me of doing it deliberately, which clearly I didn't. And, we then, after the tensions of that discussion, we met, a couple of weeks later to clear the air. And then subsequently, Michael and I have spent, good times together, social times, and we've joked about how it was a race that got away for him, and of course how his neck had changed color when he arrived in my garage. But this is part of sport. Sport gives you the highest of highs and the lowest of lows and everything in between. But you don't have to just be the competitor for that, of course. Fans of sports. I was a fan before I was a driver, and now I'm a fan. So I've lived both sides of it. But I know in football and rugby and many other great sports out there, the fans, they live it. They feel the highs when the team win, and the despair when the teams don't. It's an amazing thing, sport, the journey it takes us on.
Yeah. And when you suggested to Michael Schumacher it may in fact have been his fault and not yours, I don't suspect, in fact I know because you read it somewhere, but it wasn't like he was he didn't hold his hand up and say, oh, do you know what, okay, you're right, I'm wrong.
No, well, that was one of the things I remember saying to him when we had the meeting a couple of weeks after. And I said, look, Michael, let's both accept some responsibility and just move on. And he was like, well, I don't see why I should do. I was not to blame. And I said, come on, Michael, you must have been wrong on some occasions. And he thought about it for a moment. And then he looked at me and went, not that I remember. And I was sort of exasperated. And I went, Michael, when you're at home with your wife, you cannot be right all the time. And he went, I am. and then I kind of summed up. I thought, there's a difference between a serial winner and a multiple world champion and myself. I acknowledge I'm wrong sometimes, and he had absolute belief. But again, I say that with respect. Michael was a great champion, and obviously going through his own challenges right now. I'm not saying that disrespectfully, because we were able to joke about it and laugh about it many times afterwards, because I would always tease him by going, oh, I don't suppose you're wrong on this one, are you, Michael? He would always go, nope, definitely not.
Well, on that point, and it's clear you're remembering that all very respectfully. On that point, were you a bit too reasonable? Because everything we hear about the world of Formula One is that the drivers, one, have ginormous egos. I'm sure you have your own ego, but they are not always the most reasonable of people. You strike me as a more logical, might be the word, type than a lot of your colleagues.
Well, you can only be what you are, and you can fool other people, but I don't think you can fool yourself. And if you can fool yourself, then you're probably you're probably a psycho or something, aren't you? So I accept that I have beliefs in certain areas, and some of the beliefs I have will vary from other people's beliefs. And I would never try and convince somebody of my belief if it's different to theirs, because that's their right. I see little point in people arguing on facts, because there are some facts out there that hopefully none of us dispute. I know that some people believe the earth is flat, and they would campaign to say that the earth is flat, but I think the majority would agree the earth is round. Or it's not quite round, is it? Because at the equator, I forget what you call when it's not a perfect round shape. But anyway, so long-winded way of saying, yeah, exactly. I have my own way of approaching things. It may be different to others, but absolute belief that everything I do is right is not one of them. And I've certainly had many examples of when that would have been misguided for me to believe that I was right. But equally, I've got the power of my convictions. When I believe in something, I go for it. But I always say to young kids, sometimes I go and do talks at schools and things like that. I always say to the kids, a couple of things that you should never ever not have, or you need in life. You need an opinion. You need to at a certain point have an opinion, because an opinion helps you make a decision. And then you make your decision. And then the next thing you need is the ability to change your opinion when somebody shows you a better way, because you're a fool if you swim against the tide. So you're not a fool by making a decision that turns out not to be the best decision, because more information comes available to you. But you would be a fool not changing your direction just because, well, I've made the mind up, therefore I can't change my mind. So you understand what I'm saying? I think I'm quite practical in that when challenged, I'll make a decision. But equally, if somebody shows me a better way, wow, I'm going to jump on that bandwagon, because why
Mm.
would I want to go difficult if I can have it easy?
David, I mentioned Williams, McLaren, and then Red Bull latterly. McLaren from 96 to '04. In that period, you were probably driving your best. You were with a winning team. Mika Hakkinen is a name, obviously, people will remember very well. And Ron Dennis was there. Very interestingly, and when you said this, it didn't come across in a bitter way, I stress. It was a matter of fact way. But you were making the point, I think it was on that Beyond the Grid podcast, that really to win, to finish first in the World Championship instead of second, you need everything to be going your way, every little percentage. And maybe at McLaren, this wasn't something I was aware of, but with Mika Hakkinen and yourself, that maybe Ron Dennis ever so slightly favoured Mika Hakkinen. And to what extent that had a bearing on things, I don't know. But, you would have noted, for instance, when he pipped you in a race, they celebrated like he had beaten an opponent. And that was a tricky thing for you to handle, I suspect. Not least because you don't want to be like a spoiled kid saying, "Oh, it's not fair. Everybody love me."
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and it was part of growing up. And this is the thing where, in previous conversations, it's been noted how the Formula One drivers are getting younger and younger,
Mm.
and great talent. I have this simple belief that if you're good enough, you're old enough, and if you're good enough, you're not too old. And other sports, I remember Boris Becker. I think he was 16 or 17 when he won Wimbledon the first time. Incredibly young, but he was good enough, so he won Wimbledon. So I think there's in the context of talent, then talent is obviously what's needed to be at the top of any sport. But maturity and life experience, it comes to people at different stages. And I'm yet to meet anyone that's more mature at 20 and more life experienced at 20 than they are at 30. Normal evolution of life is you grow into life, you gain experience, you become more worldly and more able to make decisions. And I definitely think I was a better man at 30 than I was at 20, because I had more stand on my own 2 feet experience, and experience gives you an ability to really understand decisions that you're making that you may have been influenced through lack of experience by other people when you're younger. So the reason to mention that is that I was quite sensitive, I think, in my early years at McLaren, that Ron had a very close relationship with Mika.
Mm.
Mika had had a big crash in '95. He'd been in intensive care in Adelaide in an induced coma. He came out of that to then race in '96 when we were together as teammates for the first time. And Ron had stood at his bedside with him on a ventilator.
Mm.
And, of course, I was 25 years old. None of that meant anything to me. I just wanted to win races. And when I saw Ron come into the engineering debrief and sit on Mika's side of the desk and ask, "What are we doing?" and then look over at my side of the desk with my engineer and say, "What are they doing?" These little psychological things got inside my head and became a distraction. So it took time for me to discuss that with Ron over the following years. And eventually Ron did say, "Look, I've previously not acknowledged it, but yes, I do have a particular affinity to Mika because he almost died in one of my cars. And, it's not that I want him to do better, but of course I have a stronger bond." And the moment he told me, it then became not important anymore, because he'd acknowledged that what I was feeling was, in actual fact, there was some basis for me to feel that way. So it was a good life lesson, because I use it today, that if I can't, if you and I were lifelong buddies, and something that I said had upset you, if you come and tell me that and I just brush it off,
Mm.
then you're going to be disappointed, because we're friends and you're telling me something that's important and I'm not responding. If I say to you, "Look, sorry about that, I can't feel what you feel, but I can recognize that it's important to you, therefore as a friend it should be important to me," the weight would be lifted from your mind, because now you've got it off your chest, we've cleared the air, and we move on. So I think what I'm saying in a not very elegant and long-winded way is, life teaches you to deal with certain things in a better
Yeah.
way and to move on. And this is what the journey of life is. So it was tricky at the time at McLaren, but with the greatest of respect to Mika, who was an exceptional racing driver, and to Ron Dennis, who was a great team principal, it was a a wonderful period of my career, and I
Mm.
wouldn't change it, because that's what I now have as my memory bank and my life experience.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get that it's a tough dynamic, though. It's not an easy dynamic because it's so all encompassing and you're there all the time. And every time Ron walks into the paddock, you're probably, whether you like it or not, monitoring the warmth from here, by comparison with Mika to you, and trying to weigh up the status constantly.
Yeah.
And that's a tiring thing. Is that always a kind of elephant in the room with any team? Did you find, like who's number one, who
Yes.
has to let who
Yeah.
pass? That strikes me, I must say, from afar, as a not a nice dynamic. I wouldn't envy that, because look, in most sports, well, it's me against that other guy, and the terms are clear, or it's our team against their team. But generally, when you're on the same team and spending a lot of time together, you don't want to almost be competing, which is the scenario really that makes inevitable.
Yeah, it is. And in the end of the story, it's part of what you just have to deal with.
Sure.
And other sports will have it, rugby or football or hurling or whatever, when you've got your first team and the guys that are on the bench want to be on the field. So, they want to show that their skills is better than the first pick striker. And, or they're not wishing the striker to get injured, of course, because they want the team to be successful. But if the striker gets injured, they want to then show that they deserve a place in the first team. So it's a constant part of the sport that wouldn't be there, say, if you were a boxer, where it's your team against another team. So it's a different dynamic within our sport. But I think what it teaches you in life is that you don't always get what you want, which, no big revelation there. I think, everyone can realize that. But in terms of in business, it teaches you to pick your battles. What is the really, really important to you, and what are you prepared to put all your energy into achieving? And what are the things that you would like, but you're probably not going to get? Therefore, just don't even use the energy trying to get them. Just let them go, and keep your energy for what's really, really important to you, and pick your battles would be what your mum would say to you, or your father would say to you. And you're living this in real business terms and sport terms. And I think it makes you more efficient. Of course, I have strong views on certain things, and if people challenge me, then I'll take my position. But for most part, I'll listen to people giving opinions and things, and I won't react, because it's not that I don't have an opinion, but if no one's pushing me on it, I'll just let the conversation go where people say what they need to say, because I'll save my energy for what's important to me later in the day. Some people may see it as fence sitting. I see it as we all know the people that will debate or dispute or argue everything. Okay, and they're exhausting to be around. I don't want to be that person. I just want to live a healthy life, a happy life, give my best in everything I'm trying to do, whether it's cleaning the house or whatever it is that we find ourselves doing today. I'll do it to the best of my ability, because I'm just not wired to give 50%. I give everything I can, or I don't do it.
Yeah. And I guess, to round things off, in terms of where you are in your life now, like you leave behind Formula One and a brilliantly successful career. Is it a career that you look back on and you're very satisfied with, or do you think to yourself, coulda, shoulda, woulda, maybe bit of luck, might have won a world championship? Like how do you frame what you did achieve, which to me looks very considerable next to what you thought your talent levels might have merited?
Well, the truth of the answer is I don't really look back very often. So even though I'm still going to Grand Prix and I'm commentating on the current drivers, I do that really just with a racer's mind, rather than a historical point of view. I'm not really looking at it and going, oh, well, it was more difficult in my time, or it was easier in my time, because I just don't really want to live in the past. I'm very happy to live in the moment and react to what I see in front of me based on the experience that I have. I think that I'm comfortable to acknowledge I wasn't the best racing driver. I would like to suggest that I got the best out of the opportunities I was given, and I got the best out of my talent in terms of I worked hard. I worked hard physically, mentally, and with the team. So I guess in that respect, you know, I almost hesitate to say I got what I deserved,
Mm.
because, you know, there's maybe harder working people. You know, my perception is I worked hard, but there may be, and I'm sure there are harder working people out there who deserve things that they haven't got. But in terms of just talking about the sport, I retired content because I felt that I was given more than fair opportunity, and you know, a few wins slipped away. Maybe I got lucky with some of the wins. It is what it is. It
Mm.
doesn't change, I think, how my wife looks at me, how my son looks at me. It doesn't change how I sleep at night. And, you know, I'm almost a half century enjoying this life that I never asked to be born, any more than you asked to be born. And I just want to, you know, continue to try and gain life experience. I'd like to believe that my best is not behind me. I'd like to believe, you know, clearly as a racing driver, there will be no more racing. There will be no more victories.
Mm.
But I would like to imagine there'll be other challenges that I will find fulfilling and will be equally satisfying, that don't involve Formula One cars and don't
Yeah.
involve global television.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. So, on a day-to-day basis, you are not wistful or craving the massive adrenaline hit of the lights are about to turn from red to green.
Not at all, and haven't done since the day I stepped out of the car in Brazil in 2008.
Wow.
And I still get the chance to jump in a car occasionally for Red Bull and to do events. You know, we were in Belfast a couple of years ago. I was meant to be in South Africa in March, but obviously with the COVID situation, that's been postponed. And I still get to feel the power and the adrenaline of driving the car. But at no point do I wish I was back out there. I have friends who are ex Grand Prix drivers who still feel that they could be out there and they should be out there. And you know, I accept that's the way they are, but I wouldn't want to live in that space at this age. You know, physically, I can see I'm not the physical specimen that I was 10 years ago. That's nature, and I accept it. And I'll just take each day and each opportunity as it comes and try and do the best. I would just, as I say, it's a little bit where maybe I'm a little bit too Scottish and a little bit too party pooper, where you know, words, what do words mean? Well, when somebody would say, oh, it's the best day of my life, in my mind, I'm thinking, God, really? You know, is that really what you want to be the best day? It's not that it's not a great day, but it would rather imply that the future is full of something not quite as good.
Mm.
I'd like to imagine that today is going to be the best day of my life. And it doesn't mean winning a Grand Prix, but you know, there'll be an interaction hopefully with our son later, which will tickle me and I'll remember. Or there'll be, you know, I guess it's success is very much in the eye of the individual. You know, in sporting terms, it would be seen as lifting a trophy.
Mm.
But I absolutely subscribe to, there's many people having, you know, lives miles away from television and sport that are having tremendously successful days and fulfilling days.
Well, listen, that's a great point to finish on. Fascinating to get your insight in that insight into you actually, and what makes you tick and how you think. Thanks again for taking the time. You were here in your capacity as a Red Bull athlete who you drove for as well towards the end of your career, along with McLaren and Williams. David Coulthard, stay safe, obviously, over the next couple of months, and I'm sure we'll see you on our TV screens when F1 gets back up and running. Thanks so much.